Today is the third day of Nisan, the 1st of April. Whatever that means.
April's Fool's Day.
Okay. Okay, so we started speaking about what does it mean that Hashem took us out of Egypt. No, we didn't. We're not there. Sorry. We're in 156. Derech mitzvosecha korban Pesach, and we started V'zeu avadim hayinu, which is the second part of the second chapter. Right, the second chapter is divided into two parts. We finished the first one. Now we have the part that's a little bit longer, and then we go to the third chapter, which is short. So we said, I'll just read it quickly. וזהו עבדים היינו פרעה במצרים, כתפרש במשנת חסידים ובא לעיל פרק א', שאנו בני זה היינו עבדים לפרעה העומד בעורף, ומעכב שלא יהיה המשכת השב בבחינת פנימיות, אלא לא. So we explained all this, that this was possible. Pharaoh could take all our sustenance, all the affluence God was giving us, because he's like the klipa is standing there and taking out what he wants. והיינו שמבחינת הרצון שאינו מתלבש בחוכמה יוכל להיות נמשך יניקה גם לחיצונים, כי סממית בידיים תתפס, מכל מקום גם אישה מניקתם רק בבחינת אחוריים ולא מבחינת פנים, חס וחלילה, שראינם רצויים כלל כדכתיב את עשיו שנאתי, כמו שכתוב בפרק א', גם בעניין העיגולים שאחוריהם על המקיף. So all this we did. והעניין, כי הנה שם הוואי רומז על השפעת האלוקות לאבות העולמות. והנה יוד ה' שהם חוכמה בינה מבחינת צמצום והתפשטות שיש בכל השפעה. וקוצו של יוד בכתר, והוא בחינת הרצון שלמעלה מחוכמה בינה ומקור להם. Okay. So now we're taking the model of Yud Kei Vav, okay? And we're saying that the tip of the Yud is the will. The will to give something, to do something. And then, the first two letters, Yud and Hey, they're Chochmah and Bina. But now we're not going to be describing them as just Chochmah and Bina. We're going to say that they're, in the Alter Rebbe's model, they're contraction, Tzimtzum, and extension, Itpashtut. So there's a contraction, extension, drawing, Hamshacha, drawing down, and then a second extension, second Itpashtut. That's the full Yud Kei Vav Kei. We're just going to be talking about the Yud and Kei. כי כל המשכה ושפע תלוי ברצון המשפיע. Anytime there's any kind of effluence coming down, the beginning is dependent on will. That he has to want to give. ברצון המשפיע. והרצון יש בו גם כן פנימיות וחיצוניות. And the will itself, here he's describing it, has an inner aspect and an outer aspect, an interior and an exterior. והוא נקרא בעץ חיים פנים ועורף דאריך. And this is what in the Eitz Chaim he calls the face and the nape of Arich. And we said Arich Anpin is the lower parzuf of the keter, of the crown. And in Chassidus we usually identify Arich with Ratzon. We say Arich is the source of will. What's the higher? That's the lower parzuf. The higher parzuf is called Atik. And that's usually in Chassidut, again, in a very simple manner. It's described just as pleasure. That he has to receive some pleasure from what he's going to give, what he wants to do. And now he tells us what did he mean by pnimiyut v'chitzoniyut. Uvishon pasuk, if we need to connect this to a verse, we would say hu chefetz v'ratzon. She'achefetz hu pnimiyut haratzon. So what does it mean? There's two words in Hebrew for will. One is will, ratzon, and the other one is chefetz.
Is chefetz.
Today it became the word for object also.
Yeah, right.
But chefetz, kol asher chafetz.
Because it's the desire of what we want.
It's a desire. It's like desire.
So the chefetz is like what we desire.
Right. An object is like an object of desire. That's how it came about.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
How did chefetz suddenly become
an object?
Object.
Yeah.
There's no connection. Chefetz means to want something,
Well, there isn't.
to desire.
Yeah,
And I think you're right that the
That's what I
source
always
is
thought, yes.
the desire, one's
thing,
object
yes.
of desire.
Right.
Well, in English, the object is to object. He objects. There's a problem.
Interesting.
I think that's a Yitzhak.
Huh?
כמו זזים בגלל שהם זזים.
כן, זזים, כן.
חפץ
כן,
כי
חפצים בו.
Okay. Yitzhak is a whole stick about this between the object and subject versus
Right.
love and chefetz.
Right.
That's what
Right. So what does chefetz mean? Chefetz means it's the interior of arich, which of arich, of the lower partsuf of the keter. And what that means is that atik is enclosed within arich. And then it's called chefetz.
Because the chefetz is already tanug. It's a bit of a tanug.
It says, so there's tanug, there's pleasure inside. It's will that feels pleasure. When will feels pleasure, that's called also a chush. It's also called
That's a chayfetz too, yes?
that's called chefetz. Chefetz
Yes.
in general is when the higher
Will with
part of
desire.
the desire is enclosed within the will. It's not the desire. The pleasure is
Pleasure-
enclosed
pleasure
within the
is
will.
closed in the will.
Well, then it's probably what you would call in English a desire. Yeah. Okay, let's see what happens. והוא כי הדבר שמתענג בו, אם כן רצונו באמיתי ונקרא חפץ. And so the meaning here is that the pleasure went into the will, and because the pleasure is now enclosed in the will, this is the first type of yichud, the first type of unification that happens in Kabbalah. It's the first one that we see anyway. So when a person has desire, it's greater than if he just wants something, because there's already a feeling of pleasure of what he's going to receive. Right? It's because he already receives the pleasure from the object of what he wants. So that's called chefetz. So the inside, now, this is the most complex part of all of Kabbalah. In a certain sense, there's some things that are more complex, but in terms of complexity, I mean in how many moving parts there are. So in the beginning, there's 7 moving parts. We call them Sheva Tikunei Galgalta. They make up the chefetz. There's 7 rectifications. A rectification in Kabbalah means that something is within something else. So there's 7 tikunei galgalta. So first of all, there's in the crown of arich, there's 7 unifications like this, of atik going into arich. And how does that work? So it's called the gvura of chesed of atik that goes into the first the galgalta, the crown of arich, and then into the mochastima, into the chokhmah of arich. So everything has to go into everything else, except for 3 parts that stay outside. They're called the gar, the first 3 of atik that don't have a rectification, they don't have a place to go into in arich, and so they're always outside. And so we don't call that chefetz. Chefetz is all of atik that can go into arich, all of the pleasure that can go into the will. But there's 3 parts of where the pleasure came from, called the atik, the higher partzuf, which don't go into arich. And they're called radla. They're called reisha de lo yada velo yiteda. They're called the unknowable head. And in Chassidus we call that emuna. That's faith. So there's faith, pleasure, and will in arich, right? Or in the keter in general. We just say arich because it's just how it's said. Kmo chafetz bevat Yaakov. So he brings an example. Why does he bring this example? I think he brings this example because I think it's the first time that the Torah uses this word, chefetz. But it's when Shechem, the son of Hamor, he raped Dinah. And then he didn't. So it's very interesting that usually when there's something like that, there's violent. So the only thing that's working is the will. There's no.
On what's part? I'm just confused.
The violent side.
The violent side. Okay.
The one who's raping, he's
His
only
will.
working
Yeah,
by his
yeah,
will.
yeah.
Now he thinks he's working by his pleasure, but he's not working by his pleasure at all.
I see. That's within his will.
Because if he was working by his pleasure, then there would be already a rectified state. So he would have gone to them and said, "I want to marry
Yeah,
her."
he would, right. He would have skipped the.
But he
yeah.
can't. He
Yeah,
can't help
stop-
himself.
yeah.
He can't stop himself.
Yeah.
So it's a very strange situation. But then he finds himself afterwards. Wait a minute, I really do desire her.
Yeah, yeah.
So now he's in a problem because now he wants her, but he just did something that would seal her off from him forever.
That's right.
So, in any case, I think this is the first time that the Torah mentions this word chefetz. I think that's why it brings it.
In that context, I have to look it up. No, I believe you. I just want to see it.
אבל דבר שאינו מתענג בו ואיננו תכלית אצלו, אלא שצריך לכך מחמת איזה דבר המכריחו, ולולי שהיה אותו הדבר לא היה רוצה בו כלל, ואדרבה, רצונו יותר שלא היה דבר, ולא היה מצטרך לדבר שרוצה בו אתה, זה הנקרא רצון. So will is when there's no tachlis. It's what we're saying, that what the pleasure does is the pleasure adds an element of goal-oriented. Tachlis means there's a tachlit, there's a purpose to it. So the pleasure adds purpose. Without the pleasure, it's just will. What could that be? It could be a will that doesn't even come from above. It could even be a will that came from below. But the person is without pleasure, meaning he's without. There's no soul in the will. That's what we'd say. When something goes into something else, it becomes its soul. So when I have a soul, there's a purpose to what I want. When in will, the soul is the purpose, is the pleasure that I'll receive from it. So there's purpose in it. But when there's no soul to it, so it's just an empty act. So that's what happened to him. That he raped her, and that was just an empty act. But then afterwards he finds that, wait a minute, it's not that simple. I do have feelings for her. I do desire her. There was a purpose to this. Now he's stuck. Again. And not only that, he says, sometimes the will is completely contradictory to what my pleasure is. Now, what does it mean that my pleasure is a soul? It means that in the end, what's driving, at the highest level, what's driving it's like a drive. The pleasure becomes a drive. What's driving me is the pleasure I will receive. What's the pleasure I will receive? So in this world, I don't know how much pleasure there is. But the pleasure that I'll receive, what do they say to the neshama? The neshama comes down into this world and they tell it, if you are successful in this world and you follow Hashem's commandments, then there will be a pleasure that you will receive afterwards. What's the pleasure? The pleasure is, some people would say, the pleasure is the world to come. The neshama doesn't see it that way. The neshama says, the pleasure is that I will be reunited with Hashem at a higher level.
At a higher level.
That's the pleasure that I'm seeking. It's not the cakes that I'll eat.
Yeah.
It's not interested in that. Because we see that there's an example in halacha even of will that is forced, coerced. There's no pleasure in it at all. The person wants exactly the opposite. So the want is the pleasure. It's very interesting because we think that want is the will. It says, no, you can be forced to want something without there being any true wanting. There's no soul inside. Where's the soul coming from? The soul is really from the pleasure. So sometimes, for instance, the court says he has to divorce, and he doesn't want to divorce. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, that he can be coerced to divorce. And how do they do it? They coerce him until he says, I want. Everybody knows it's an empty want. There's nothing there. But still will. So there we say, like the Rebbe always explains, in the heart of hearts there's still will. There's still pleasure, but the pleasure didn't go in. It's just that it's not there. עד שאומר רוצני, הרי גם מה שאומר הוא מסכים ליתן הגט על כורחו מחמת הכפייה נקרא רוצה, לפי שמתרצה. So he's agreeing, he's becoming agreeable, even though he doesn't really want it. He doesn't really want to give this get. He doesn't really want to give this bill of divorce. על כל פנים, אתה, even, at least now, like we said, אם כי אינו חפץ בו באמת. Even though he doesn't really desire it, we call this wanting. Because even an empty wanting is still a want.
But would you say it's like, let's say, in economics, we call it derived demand. I want to get to the Alps. That's where I really want to be. I'm going to go to transportation. Transportation is a hassle.
Uh-huh.
So I'm doing this transportation business, and I'm selling in order to get to what I really want. I don't really want this transportation. If I could get there just like this instantly, it would be fine. But I need to do this whole transportation business. Railways and cars and planes and all this, it's a hassle.
Yeah, but
Because I want to get somewhere. Is that what he means by this?
No, because there's purpose all the time. The purpose is still to get to the Alps. The purpose is
That's
inside.
all about. I'm doing Ratzon in order to get to the pleasure of it.
Here it's like, if it was up to me, I wouldn't do this at all. It's always like, I have no interest in this.
But he has no interest in going to these stations to get to his place.
Yeah, he does, because there's purpose in
there's
it, because there's no other way.
Isn't the Ratzon actually a handmaid of the pleasure? It's doing something.
In general, yes.
It's true that if it were
Right,
not
right.
that pleasure, there's no reason for it.
Right.
But so it's a hassle, but I'm doing it in order to get to the
Okay.
pleasure.
That's if the soul is inside, if the pleasure is inside. But sometimes the pleasure is not there, or at least not visibly there. And so the person is doing an empty act. And we still call it wanting, because he still wants it, he's still doing it. I mean, we see that he's doing it. In many ways you could say that any time that a person does an avera, they do a sin, and that's exactly what they have. There's no tachlis in it, there's no purpose to it. It's just because I've been hijacked.
Doesn't he get some sort of false pleasure from it? I mean,
That's not the pleasure. It's not the pleasure that comes from the crown.
kid, but isn't it a
It's like physical pleasure.
Isn't it some sort of level of pleasure?
Okay, but it's a physical pleasure. That's what's taking
So
over.
you're saying the Repetina was not a pleasure at all, it was a will.
It was a will. That's what he's saying here.
That's
That
right.
Afterwards, he
Afterwards,
discovered
the
that he
desire-
had purpose.
Okay. Just a second, sorry. Yeah.
So this is a whole sugya in itself. Why is it that sometimes I have to do something wrong? En adam omed al divrei Torah shenichshal beim. That a person doesn't understand the purpose of Torah until he transgresses it. That sometimes the pleasure can only come after the act. So that's a sugya in and of itself. Maybe we'll get into it tomorrow, because we need to still see inside the Eitz Chaim. I didn't think we'd have time today, so I didn't bring it, but I brought it, but no time. So Bezrat Hashem, we'll start looking at this. Is one of the most interesting sugyos in Chassidus. It's the most elaborate in Kabbalah.
Amen.